Good afternoon, evening, or morning to everyone, depending on where you are. We're going to go ahead and get started on today's webinar. My name is Alex McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Marketing here at D3 Security. I'll also be your host for the day. Before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are recording this webinar. It will be sent to you after the live presentation via email. You will also be able to find it and our other content on our resources section of d3security.com. We also encourage discussion. You can ask questions using the chat box on your screen, and we'll address them either on the fly or at the end of the show. We have two great panelists today, so let's keep them on their toes with some great questions. Questions are always very encouraged. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Rothman and Stan Engelbrecht. Gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves, starting with you, Stan.
Hi, good everyone. This is Stan Engelbrecht here. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Practice at D3 Security. We supply a incident response, case management, and SOAR product for security operations centers as well as other information security fields. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to be joined by Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today for today's little event. We're going to talk about soaring and security automation and orchestration and all sorts of other fun stuff. So with that, let me introduce myself a little bit, talk a little bit about my organization, which is called Securosis. We are independent security research analysts. All we do is focus on security. We tend to be a little bit deeper than most of the other folks that you may have heard doing this talking head stuff. We get our hands dirty in many cases. We are all 25 plus year security professionals. So we've seen it, done it, screwed it up a number of times, and actually like to relay that kind of in the field, in the trenches type of perspective to really help you make better decisions faster. And the other thing you need to know is that without a lot to do every day besides, kind of wave my hands, I spend a lot of time on the meme generator. And that's why you'll see throughout my slides that I have a whole bunch of memes in here. First one showing that we put the pontiff in pontification. So again, without further ado, let's kind of jump in and talk a little bit about security operations. So here is the most interesting man in the world, and he basically is sitting here saying, I don't always enforce security best practices. Okay, I really do. I pretty much suck at SecOps. And that's kind of a situation that we hear a lot of when I talk to practitioners, when I'm in there working with different companies. It's really shiny to talk about analytics, and it's shiny to talk about, kind of fancy controls, but the kind of hard stuff, right? The operational things, the things that, have to get done after all the shiny things happen, that's kind of where we don't do as well as we probably want to, right? So when we think about one of the key aspects of success moving forward as security practitioners, it has got to be improving our ability to do security operations. So this thing will switch. And you know what? It's not going to get better, because obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in our world, right? The adversaries continue to, I don't even want to say innovate, but they keep at it, right? They are persistent. They are focused. And in a lot of cases, especially depending on the type of adversary you're dealing with, they could be very sophisticated and in many cases innovating, right? But they don't need to be, because in a lot of cases, we're not closing the door. We're saying, come on in, right? And that's what poor security operations does. Our infrastructure is getting more complex. You may have heard of this thing called the cloud. I know it's kind of novel, but that is obviously making everything more complicated from the standpoint of where your data is and even how you do incident response when you're not in control of many of the systems that have a significant impact of where your critical data is, right? We've got tons of devices. I have 5 or 6 of my own devices that I connect into a variety of different corporate systems that we use at Securosis, right? And then we also have this fancy term called hunting, which are people that are out there trying to find active adversaries in your environment, and sometimes they do, right? And that means we actually have to do things when the hunters find stuff, or when an alert kind of flashes in our SIM, or when some type of new infrastructure is deployed. What we have to do from a security operations standpoint is make sure that everything is buttoned up. And what complicates things is this last bullet here, or second to last bullet here, right? The skills gap. Right? That's what I talk about with so many different senior security professionals around the world today. They're just like, Mike, how do I get enough people? Well, you can't. So we have to figure out a way to address the operational requirements, to meet the operational requirements for all of this infrastructure complexity, for all of this adversary advancement, again, for all of these devices that are out there, knowing that we don't have enough people, don't have enough resources in order to do our job, right? So again, we can't sit here and just say, oh, it's the problems are going to work themselves out, because they're just not going to. So the next thing we hear from the industry is you need better alerts. If we had actionable alerts, then all of our problems would go away because we would know exactly what to do. Well, there certainly is some capability there, right? There is some value to that statement. Obviously, through analytics and threat intelligence, what we can do is really narrow down, close the aperture. Narrow the aperture is something that a lot of people say, really focus our resources, allocate things more effectively. However you want to talk about it, there's nothing wrong with getting better alerts. There's nothing wrong with using and leveraging analytics more effectively from the standpoint of helping us to figure out what we should be focusing on. There's nothing wrong with threat intelligence basically telling us we've seen this attack before, it's not great, do something about it. But that's where the rubber meets the road. Do something about it, right? The point here, alerts appeared ahead of most major breaches. Just look at it, right? We've gotten the alerts, this console flashed that alert hit there, and we still got popped. We still lost data. Why? Because somebody has to do something. An alert is just a notification that says, I've got to do something. You still have to do something. Right? That's the key problem. That's the key issue. That's the constraint that we get to when we really start thinking about how do we improve our security operational capabilities. So that's kind of where we get to this concept of SOAR. Now, I don't love the acronym, to be clear, and that's mostly because I didn't come up with it, so somebody else came up with it. So therefore, by proxy of the I didn't come up with it acronym, I can't possibly like it, but it actually is reasonably apropos for what we're trying to do, right? Security orchestration, automation, and response. The idea here is that we want to work smarter, not harder. Now, just to make sure we're crystal clear here, I'm not sitting here saying that SOAR is going to allow you to not work hard, right? I'm not sitting here saying, you're going to play a whole bunch more Tetris or Fortnite or whatever the fancy game is that those kids play today that reside in your SOC. I'm not saying that at all, right? But what I'm saying is that what we can't do and how we have to scale our capabilities is by working smarter and orchestration, making a lot of different controls work together in a unified fabric or mesh, right? Orchestrating all these things together, that's critical because going between consoles is difficult. It takes too much time. It's too complicated, right? And we also need to automate the capabilities, automate the playbooks that we define. And we'll talk about playbooks quite a bit. But, you know, this idea of an automation platform which allows you to really kind of enumerate and execute on playbooks for how your security operational motion should be running, that's what we're trying to get to. And then the ability to orchestrate those tools in order to make and take the actions when they need to happen without human intervention. That's really what we're talking about here, right? The ability to soar. I know, yeah, it sounds kind of corny. I know, I get it. But I'm trying to be aspirational here, guys. You got to play with me a little bit. But the idea is what we're trying to do is make our entire operational motion work better, work in concert with each other so that we can move faster, we can be more agile, we can actually keep pace with both the infrastructure advancements that we see, as well as making sure that we keep pace with how quickly the adversaries are working. Now, it still gets back to the humans. I took a call today. It was an interesting call. We were talking about automation and orchestration platforms, and the person asked me, says, hey, have you talked to any companies that used and deployed these automation platforms in order to get rid of SOC staff? And that actually was an interesting question. It's been a long time since I got that. And most of the time it was, how am I going to make a case to my finance team that I still need all of my people after we implement all of this automation, right? And I kind of said, God, I haven't had that discussion probably for 18 months or 2 years, because nobody I talk to, literally nobody I talk to says I have too many SOC resources, even if I automate the crap out of everything. Right? What they're saying is, I can't scale up my operational motions in order to keep pace with what's happening. So again, there's still a huge role for humans. But what we want the humans to be doing is what the humans are better at, right? And that's defining what my operational processes should be. That's what I want a human doing. How should this work? Right? Designing those playbooks, figuring out what those policies can and should be, right? Designing the controls that go and protect the data that is being exposed by the applications that are happening all over the place, right? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, still in our own data center, increasingly virtualized, hybridized, use whatever terms you want. Doesn't really matter. The point is, humans still have a huge role in what we're doing from a security operations standpoint, but we want them to be doing what they're good at. And the bottom bullet is really the key. Have the cycles to handle exceptions. Because no matter how much time you spend figuring out what those playbooks should be, designing the control sets, making sure that the operational motions make sense and that the processes are all documented, there is always something different. There's always someone special, and those folks need exceptions. The problem is, we make an exception, now we hardly do it at all. So we just even open up a port, we're just trying to bail the water out of the boat with a small cup, right? It doesn't work very well. So having humans with the time and the resources and the capabilities to be able to design the playbooks and then handle the exceptions to those playbooks, it really changes how you do security operations. It really changes everything about how you're going to perform the practice of security moving forward. And every so often, I'm fortunate enough to really be invited to talk to a variety of different college programs for folks that are studying computer security. And I think that's great, right? Because that gives me the opportunity to influence these folks before they get out into the world. I kind of tell them a little bit about how miserable their life is going to be and how they can't win because it's not about winning in security, it's about surviving, right? Because the adversary just has to be right once and we have to be right all the time. And, all those platitudes that we tell ourselves as security people. And inevitably, somebody asks me, what should I focus on, right? What should I study? What should I really get good at? And my answer for a long time was application security, and it's still that partially. But security architecture, right, the rise of the architects, now outside of this silly blue construction hat that you really shouldn't wear if you are a security person, but the architect, right, security architecture, security design, understanding controls, that's where a lot of the future is, because as we get more automated, as things like DevOps and continuous deployment really change how we do technology over time, that means we have to have security built in, baked in to these technology stacks. And that means we have to have an architecture level view of what happens and how it happens and why it happens and whether it should happen or not, right? So architecture is one of those key skills that you have to have on your team, because the operational stuff is going to happen within the machines. Planning out those playbooks, handling those exceptions, that's really where a lot of the capabilities have to happen moving forward. So let's change gears a little bit and talk specifically about what it is that you should be automating, right? Here's a handful of examples. So first, I'll talk about alert enrichment. When we talk about response, that's something that in a lot of cases, analysts spend the first 20 to 30 minutes when they're dealing with some type of case just gathering information, right? I've got an alert. Well, what about those IP addresses? Who's the adversary? What kind of malware is there? All those kind of things are actually machine readable information based upon things that are within the alert. Why can't we just have the machines go out and check the threat intel sources, pull that information back, do a malware analysis, pull that information back, flag different things that we see based upon what's happened, work and search on different information sources that maybe have community involved there to find out, if one of your peer group has gotten hit by something that looks an awful lot like that. All of that can be automated, right? That's alert enrichment. Incident response, we can actually prepare for the response in an automated fashion. Quarantine the device, take forensics images, hook up your jump kit, do the initial type of analysis. All of that stuff can be automated. And by the way, that's a huge aspect and huge opportunity for orchestration from that standpoint of, kind of working with the networking devices to pull that device off of the specific network or replace it. Right, so again, incident response, another key use case there. Phishing is another thing, right? Everybody gets phishing messages. Well, I get the phishing messages, some kind of link in there. I can check that link against both threat intel to see if it's blacklisted. If not, we can let it run in our sandbox and figure out what's happening there. And then if it is a problem, we can blacklist that on the egress filter automatically and wipe out any example of that message from the email gateway. Everything automated. So I've been talking a lot. Stan, I assume you're still awake. Are there other cool examples and use cases that you guys at D3 see with working with customers all the time?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. Phishing tends to be, I think, probably the number one, and that's because, we've talked about this in the past, where the human being tends to be the weakest link, and that's just something that's going to be there, right? We want to help people. And sometimes we, and I don't care who it is, you could be a security expert with a ton of experience, and we've seen in the past, people get phished, right? Something comes in, it looks legit, and unfortunately we get caught. Other use cases are, like you mentioned, like the malware analysis side of things. If you're pulling in something that, has got a hash value in there or something else that you've seen in the past, this is something that should be automated, right? You shouldn't have to spend the time gathering all the intelligence. That's, as you pointed out, that's the machine language part of it. And those are areas where we've seen from clients that are trying to automate that, where they're trying to help their SOC, use their time better rather than having to do all the information gathering. Let's get the machines to do most of the gathering, if not all of it, and actually get the analysts doing what they're paid the big bucks for and what they're really good at, which is the analysis side of it.
Yeah, you bet. Those are, again, great kind of examples that, lend a lot of heft to a lot of the noise that I make here in terms of what's actually happening out there in the industry. And again, the point here that there are dozens of others. I was at the reInvent conference maybe 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I can't remember it anymore. But time just blurs together nowadays. Pretty sure it was 2 weeks ago. But I saw the CISO of Amazon, right? CISO of Amazon Web Services get up in front and basically say the area, the key, most important area of focus moving forward is automated remediation. And he talked about how if a human has to get involved in one of their processes, that is a failure to automate. Now, to be clear, they
Well, we may have lost Mike mid-sentence.
Yeah, it looks like we lost Mike here, so we'll have to shift gears on the fly. We have two questions that have come in, so maybe Stan, this is a good opportunity for that. And one person asked, and I'll get a hold of Mike while you answer this. But the question is, what's the difference between Playbooks and Runbooks?
Good question. Playbooks, Runbooks, really depends on how you look at it. Oftentimes, Runbook gets defined as like an action. So as Mike was alluding to, if there's an action that a machine can take, that would be really considered a runbook within our environment. A playbook is more of the entire holistic viewpoint of a certain incident coming in. So something that would be, from, if I use a NIST framework, which is probably just an easy one to work from, your detection analysis, containment eradication, and post-incident activities, that would be, everything within there would be classified as part of a playbook. Now, you might have multiple runbooks within that playbook scenario. So some of the runbook is going to be gathering information. Other portions of the runbook is going to be, additional queries that may have to be done in a semi-automated format. And other portions of the runbook is going to be like automated blocking or deciding, whether or not to update a rule or a policy within the environment. So again, a playbook really would be a more orchestrated, holistic viewpoint of the entire item itself. So where are you at within which particular phase? And it doesn't really matter whether it's NIST or cyber kill chain or MITRE, whatever framework you're using, or even if it's ad hoc procedures. You really kind of have to look at what areas you want to automate at each particular procedure or phase that you're working at. So that's really kind of an area there where I'd point that out.
Thanks, Dan. And
no
the title of our webinar today is How to Get Security Automation Quick Wins. And can you talk a little bit about how an immature SOC might be able to get off to a good start, get some wins, and still keep their eye on long-term value?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's a great point. In that particular case, you really want to take a look at understanding where your processes and procedures are to begin with. So even if you're an immature SOC, you really need to kind of look at, where's your starting point? What are the items you may be dealing with the most? And maybe phishing is a good one to start with. But really defining those particular areas that you need to. In other words, what are the initial processes and procedures? And the quick win is, really on the intelligence gathering side of it. That's an area where I would say pretty much every vendor that we've spoken to in terms of gathering threat intelligence areas has APIs that you can tap into. Where SOAR portion or SOAR platform, I should say, within an environment can automate the lookups. That's going to save the analysts a lot of time. It's a really quick win out of the box, so to speak, and then building up from there. But that's going to be your first quick win, is really automating the lookup of the initial intelligence that you want to bring in for your analysts on an initial alert.
We're obviously Mike got kidnapped or something like that. So I think we're pretty close to some of the D3 portion of the slides, and I know you can touch on some of the things Mike was going to talk about as well. So if you want, why don't we move ahead a few slides, and we can talk about selecting and evaluating the SOAR platform, and then move into how do we scale security automation, and talk about some of the things a product specifically can do for you.
Yeah, it sounds. You know what? That sounds like a good place to start with here. So defining success and avoiding the pitfalls. This really comes down to really watching what you're automating. Again, like I said before, sort of a first initial ROI would be something like threat intelligence gathering. When it comes to the action portion of it, this is really where you really need to define the process as well as to what you want to automate. What's your threshold in terms of the risk that you want to assign to something? So, for example, if you're blocking, incoming IP addresses, maybe from a certain area or a certain range, is this something you want to do completely automated, or is it something that you want to have, an analyst take a look at first? Blocking the wrong thing or updating a rule set, to scale can quickly cause issues. And that's where you kind of really have to define what you're doing, look at what your analysts are doing over time. As Mike's pointing out here, iterate through the human approval process. Maybe don't, automate blocks completely to begin with, but watch how things are getting handled, see those particular processes that you can save time on, and over the course of time, after the SOC's comfortable, after the enterprise is comfortable with how you're doing things, look at automating those particular ones that are happening over and over again. Mike pointed out, handle the exceptions. There's always going to be exceptions that come up. You're going to have issues, items where you come in where there may be malware or file hashes that you would normally block, but maybe you have to go down into it a little bit deeper. And these are areas where the analysts need to really kind of take control and not maybe just completely automate the processes of items coming in. It really takes careful forethought in there. Maybe at that point, we'll move ahead a little bit here in looking at selecting a SOAR platform. And again, this is where you want to look at, supporting and scaling throughout the environment, what type of connectors and APIs are available. And, like anything else, there's going to be items that are going to be out of the box. There's going to be items that, are probably going to be something that you grow into as you mature as a SOC and as you mature your processes and procedures. Tool sets are another thing. They come and go in terms of what people use in the environment. There's oftentimes they may stick with a certain vendor for a couple of years and then switch over depending on how things go. How versatile is your SOAR platform at that point? Can they scale? Can they keep up? Do they have items that you need, not just out of the box, but do they have the support going forward that if something new comes up, that they have the ability to get it into their environment in a timely fashion. So these are items that you may need to look at in terms of those type of items there. POC and knowledge transfer. Going forward, these days, oftentimes, especially in a POC environment, you need to go and check on different areas, different things that are going on, and the POC can be a good aspect for telling you how a company is going to handle items coming in, how, if there's items that come up that are, a bit out of the blue, how are they handling it? How's their support for you during the POC time? It usually gives you a good indication of the level of support that you're going to have when you actually choose a solution. And knowledge transfer. What type of knowledge are you gaining from that particular vendor? How transparent are they? These type of items are all things that you can look at when you're dealing with each particular SOAR vendor as you move forward in this area. So, kind of looking at scaling, this is a bit of an interesting one here. We deal with a lot of clients that want to scale to different portions. What a number of them have found out is that oftentimes scaling can be a rather difficult area here. It was humbling is something that we kind of hear from different clients and even from different prospects that we talked to, that when they looked at actually scaling a procedure, it took a lot more work than what they thought it initially was. And not that that's a bad thing, but what it shows is that oftentimes scaling can be tricky. It's not something that necessarily happens immediately. It's something that usually becomes an iterative process over the course of time, and that needs to be managed. The workflows need to be really well defined in terms of what you want to do, and then to automate those processes, as you go. Like I said before, you want to increase the amount of automation you do over time, but it needs to be done in a way that isn't going to disrupt the business aspect of it as you move forward. And this is something where, again, choosing a vendor that you want to go with, how are they going to help you with this? Are they going to have a plan for you moving forward in terms of what you want to look at moving forward? So maybe you're going to start with something simple as phishing, and you're going to move into, malware type incidences and unauthorized access and threat hunting, as we'll get into a little bit more later. But how is the vendor going to help you with this? These are questions that you should be bringing up with them as you're moving forward and looking at what you want to scale into. Orchestrating the infrastructure. I mean, we talked to a lot of people, and I'm sure that most of the listeners, on the line have got a lot of security tools that they're using right now. Mike pointed out, switching between the number of different platforms that you're using becomes difficult. You don't want to be switching from panel to panel to panel, going through things. You want to be able to have more of a single pane of glass, where, I think people are working towards that. But ultimately, the number of switches between panels you want to limit as much as possible, and automation can help with that. That's where your SOAR engine and your infrastructure, working hand in hand, can really help with that. And that's where you want to look at, the type of app integrations, how feature rich is it, what type of integrations are being supplied. But moving forward, what can you expect from that particular vendor? How can you, what reassurances do they have, and how do they work with you in those particular areas? And I'm just looking here. Mike, did you make it back in? It looks like
I did. My goodness.
Welcome back.
That was the best presentation I ever made. Absolutely the best. So I'm sure yeah. Do we want to go back? Just keep going.
You know what? I'm happy to head back and I mean we didn't get a chance to go. I want to hear the end of the Amazon story because I was actually looking forward to that. So if we want to head back and finish off those points, we can jump ahead. I got no problems. I mean that's part of these things.
Let's do that because so if I drop kind of at that point, the point was the CISO of Amazon's whole concept was about automated remediation being kind of the most important thing that folks can work on moving forward. It's one of those things where obviously they are way out in front, from an innovation standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a scale standpoint. But this person's perspective was if human is touching anything in their operational environment, that is a failure to automate. So it's one of those things that, again, that really showed me the future from that standpoint. Again, and that gets back to how do we get there, right? And a lot of it gets back to what is the capability, what is the comfort that you have within your organization about embracing automation. A lot of folks, again, if it's within the security team, you can absolutely automate everything that you want. It's where you get those demarks between security and operations where there may be some resistance. So that becomes a cultural discussion that you have to have about how much on that, again, continuum of automated remediation you would want to get to. And finally, I want to talk about trust. Right? Because that's kind of one of those things. Again, I grew up as a technology person. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, over 25 in security. I never trusted automation in order to do things. It was like, you can keep your Skynet. That's not really interesting to me, because I need to do it myself. There's no way I'm letting the machine, crater my infrastructure. Nowadays, the conversations I have with people are, man, if I can stop working 12-hour days and get to like reasonable 8 to 10-hour days, I'm good. Bring Skynet on, right? But the reason to get to that point and how you get to that point is really building trust. And you build trust by iterating through a process to gain comfort with the automations and with the triggers. So how do you do that? You do it by moving slowly, not lazily, not obstinately, but carefully. right? Move carefully towards these automations where you're starting and you have the trigger and it'll tell you what to do, and then you can approve it with a human to say, click, yep, go do it. Right? And once you get comfortable, you see it 2 or 3 times, it's not going to screw things up, then you let the machine go through it, but you log, right? Log everything like you're debugging new code so that you know where something went wrong if it goes wrong. And then you can talk about that guardrails concept that I had mentioned before, right? Making sure that you have those borders, those boundaries, and that you can't cross those boundaries with any of the automations. Again, gets back and highlights the importance of architecture there to define those playbooks and to define those guardrails. Now let's talk real quick about the platform, right? We'll hit that. We'll hit the first point last because that gets back, and then we'll head back over to where Stan left off. But again, what I want to talk about here, and what I want to kind of mention is how much you can get out of the box, right? Connectors, the APIs, out of the box automations, that streamlines your ability to get productive quickly. So that's one of the things where what you want to do is make sure that all of the platforms that you have to worry about, all of the devices that you want to orchestrate, all of the triggers that you would receive, that they can be pulled into your SOAR platform quickly and effectively without you having to do a lot of work. You want to make sure that you're comfortable with how you build the automations out, right? That's typically some kind of visual builder that you use in order to design the playbook in the tool. Make sure you're comfortable with that because, yeah, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff out of the box from the vendor, but you're going to need to customize it to your environment. Make sure you're cool with the visual builder. And then finally, getting back to that trust point, making sure that you have circuit breakers so that the automations don't run roughshod, using guardrails, as well as being able to roll back any changes that you make. Those are the things that are absolutely critical from the standpoint of ensuring that you can build trust in the system. And finally, let's talk a little bit about technology and knowledge transfer. You can use your proof of concept engagement with whatever vendor you decide to start working with as a means to understand how to build the automations, how to orchestrate amongst the different tools, get a handful of them up and running via the POC, but more importantly, so that you know how to do this moving forward so that, again, it's the whole thing of teaching somebody to fish versus giving them a fish. You want to learn how to fish because, as we talked about before, there are thousands of automations that you can build and orchestrations that you can build into the platform. You don't want to be dependent on somebody else to build those for you. So that is, kind of one of those key aspects of ensuring that you select the right platform as you are choosing it. So sorry for the little interruption, Stan. I appreciate you letting me go back and finish my wonderful presentation. Now let's jump back into to where you were.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to have you back. I think just moving forward here, I actually want to hit this question that was brought up because I think this is. Truth be told, I mean, being in the market, it does get a bit confusing. So I'm going to read the question out just so that we have it here. It says, is the view that remediation is a mandate within SOAR or a more aspirational goal? That is to include automated remediation as part of a SOAR program. Okay, that's a great question. I think if you're looking at it from a technology standpoint, you definitely want to have the option of having the ability to automate remediation within a platform. Is it mandated? I think that goes on to what Mike mentioned is more of a cultural question at that particular point there. I work with security teams where they are mandated, so the SOC is mandated to do the remediation. And I work with other ones where they actually are restricted from the tool sets and they can't actually do the remediation. They have to they basically forward on their summary of what they believe should be done and have to pass that on to other teams to actually do the remediation. Mike, any further comment on that particular question there?
Stan, I think you did a great job of kind of highlighting that. That's one of the things that, kind of I did mention is it really is kind of a cultural thing. And it's funny because just use a little bit of an analogy, but you'll get the point when I finish the story. I was talking to, a friend of mine, he's CISO for a large transportation company, and he was telling me about, kind of they're embracing the cloud and they're moving towards the cloud. It's really cool because they can, so I said, oh, that's great. So, you can just provision things, quickly and get things up and running fast. And the guy starts laughing. And I'm like, well, what's so funny about that? He goes, well, let me tell you about our provisioning process for new servers in the cloud. You fill out a form that then goes through 3 levels of authorization, and then you get your server in the cloud. I'm like, wait, hold on a second. You're telling me you're basically provisioning stuff, manually through this weird homegrown system when a developer can just, clickety-click and get servers. And he said, yeah. And the point there is, it really isn't a non sequitur. The point there is that's culturally what worked for them. Even though you can doesn't mean you will in your environment. So I think to kind of wrap that up in terms of what Stan was really saying, a lot of it gets back to what you are comfortable with in terms of automation. I don't think it's going to be easy to scale up security to where it needs to be without doing automated remediation, but everybody's got to get there in their own time, right? Everybody's got to get to the point of understanding, what they're comfortable with, when they get comfortable with it, so you'll get there. I have confidence in it, but it may not be tomorrow.
Yeah, 110% agree. So I'm going to just slide forward here and look at where we were at. So I kind of finished this off in terms of looking at the different vendors, look at how many. Mike mentioned this too. I don't know. It seems like there's a new security tool popping up like every other day, and for SOAR vendors, us alike, that could be a bit daunting in terms of have you heard of this tool? Have you heard of this tool? Moving forward, and Mike mentioned, on the proof of concept side of it, this is where I would really encourage you to look at, how the vendor's supporting you in terms of your proof of concept. And while, not everything may be out of the box, but how are they supporting you with those items that aren't out of the box? What are they, what are they giving you for support? How are they communicating with you? These are all important things to look at moving forward in that way. So I want to go in here. So, and this, again, automation doesn't happen automatically. Mike mentioned this. It's going to take time. This isn't something that I would say that you tend to rush through. It's something that happens as an iterative process. What's your risk appetite? That's essentially what it comes down to. How, obviously, Mike, your story there on the, with the Amazon executive, if they have a human touching it, they failed. That's a big leap to take in terms of a SOC. And I don't work in the clients that I work with. If we were to walk in and go, okay, we're going to automate all of your remediation procedures, you'd have a lot of people putting on the brakes because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, especially if you're scaling up incorrectly. So I think that's another area where we have to be careful of. We focus on, and there was a question that was brought up just while you were disconnected in terms of the difference between a playbook and a runbook in the environment. We do make a bit of a differentiation there. So you'll notice here, we have a library based off of NIST 861. It doesn't have to be that. As I point this out to all of our clients and any prospects we talk to, we don't really care what your framework is. I've worked with clients that have a total ad hoc framework that come up with their own processes and procedures, and other ones that are really rigid, ones that deal with ISO 27000, and that's what they do. The big thing is understand your own processes and procedures. And while we have ours based off of NIST as a help out of the box, so if you're looking at an overall procedure from detection analysis through to your post-incident activity, this is what gets included in ours. But again, having the ability to build out your holistic playbook in there, rather than just having a run book that says, okay, now I've done this. I've done this one action like block a port, or I've done, this one action of bringing in threat intelligence from a particular tool. a playbook really needs to be built out around the entire incident procedure, in my opinion, and that may have multiple actions in there. You may be pulling from multiple intelligence tools, and you may give your analysts the ability to do multiple actions on the way out, whether it's updating an endpoint tool like Carbon Black or a network tool or some other firewall rule that you need to update. Oftentimes, when you're dealing with an incident, there's not going to be just one path of a solution. You're going to have to look at a number of different things. And, where can these procedures be automated? And, and it doesn't happen automatically is my big point here. Kind of moving through Visual Playbook Editor. This was on actually, Mike, you had this one with your ending slides. A Visual Playbook Editor gives you the ability to process your workflow in a graphical way rather than just in a printed material or some other PDF. Not that I don't think those are important. I think they are. But I think in being able to build out visually and having an easy place to do it where you can see your decision trees, where you can look at where your automated actions are, and to have those items out of the box where you've got the quick components that don't require coding, pre-built applets within the system that support pulling intelligence or doing actions, I think is important. And these are all items that a person should really look for when you're really evaluating your particular SOAR product.
One thing I'd add to that, Stan, is it really is. I mean, it's a personal decision, right? Whether you understand how the Visual Playbook works, and when comparing a variety of these tools, it really is about what tool you and your team is going to be most comfortable with. And again, my interface does this or my interface does that. Again, I mean, I think that you can say most of the tools are going to allow you to build whatever it is the automation is, through this visual metaphor. It gets back to comfort, right? What are you going to be most productive in? Because that's what the name of the game is here, right? It's making sure that you can get the stuff done as quickly as possible in a way that, makes sense to you. So that's kind of where, again, through the POC, a lot of learning and using these tools and figuring out which one is going to work for your team is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's I mean, as well as I do, there's no one size fits all. And we've run into it where, just that every SOC handles things differently. Everybody's got their own procedures. Everybody's got their own tool set. And these are all factors that have to go into there. Is what's going to fit in the environment and the culture the best. And moving forward, can the tool scale with you, over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, if that's your plan for that particular tool set. And a SOAR tool is no different in that aspect. Being proactive. This is another thing where I think, Mike, I'll double back on that. I'm not a huge fan of all the acronyms that happen in our industry as well. Security orchestration, automated response, that really limits, I think, what a true SOAR product should be doing for you. There's other areas. In other words, just because it quote unquote has an automated response doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to use it for other things like threat hunting, like vulnerability scanning, false positive tracking. These type of things should be done within the environment. Another thing, looking forward, like we've got lost device investigation in there. We run into this quite often where, stolen laptops or USB sticks lost and found. Those used to be the realms of, the corporate and the physical security realm. That's changed depending on what is on that particular device. A stolen laptop can very easily go from something that is, it got taken out of my car, I need a replacement, to all of a sudden finding out that it was unencrypted and had, basically intellectual property on it from the company. That's all of a sudden a data breach that is in a different realm now. And, how is your tool set handling this? Right? Are you hemmed in having to cross over into multiple tools, or can your tool handle, the multiplicity, I would say, of these type of items going forward? I mean, moving here again, this is more of a use case, and this was something that we discovered with one of our clients, and is, again, I think in terms of an ROI, I'm going to focus probably more on the automated intelligence gathering rather than the click remediation side of it. But basically, we had a client using PhishMe. A lot of this was a very manual procedure in terms of, getting the PhishMe report into an inbox, doing a manual download, sending the file off to the sandbox, and then, looking at, creating an incident out of it, grabbing additional threat intelligence. And their SOC person actually took me through the procedure, and it was, almost a 25-minute procedure just on the gathering side of it, in terms of a lot of the intelligence that they needed to gather. And this is, when you're dealing with as much phishing items that come through, this starts really adding up, and this really takes a lot of time for your analysts that are dealing with this. And different people have different things automated, in terms of this. But this was what we found for a particular client of ours, where we really went into it and looking. And this is again an area, and different vendors will handle this differently. And again, this comes down to the different procedures within an individual SOC. But this was something where we looked at going, this really should be done on an automated fashion. That's syncing up with that inbox where these reports are coming in, or directly with PhishMe, and then pulling through, parsing out the email, getting the IOCs out, sending off the attachment off to the sandbox, and the report coming back in to the system, all in an automated fashion, so that when the SOC actually opens up the report in the platform, the intelligence is there for them. They've got the items back from the sandbox, from the MSG file, and they can actually just start doing their analysis of the procedure. That in alone, saved a huge amount of time, and this is where we're finding probably one of the biggest out-of-the-box ROIs for the platform, is the fact that the initial threat intelligence gathering, the moving the information around into a single pane of glass, more or less, in terms of what the analyst needs to look at. And this is probably one of the quickest, biggest wins you can have out of the box. And really is something where you don't need to worry about how is it going to impact the environment, because you're not necessarily doing an action within the environment yet, but you are saving a lot of the intelligence gathering, which, Mike, I think you pointed out at the beginning, was this is really an area where a human shouldn't have to go and manually do an upload and a download, or copy and paste into different areas for, if you really want to look at it that way. And that's what we found. Was that first section here was, where the SOC 1 is, that intelligence gathering can be completely automated, and is a great starting point, I think, for most SOCs, and is low impact in terms of how is it going to affect the environment itself. Moving forward on this one here, I'm just going to go a little bit more forward here and look at. This was sort of the business overview of the outcome, and we rough estimated this in terms of what their cost was for an analyst over the course of time saving. So about 49 hours a week, and roughly $190,000 a year in terms of cost for what it was costing the analyst. And this is going to vary. This isn't going to be for everyone in everyone's SOC. But I mean, we had other SOCs that we talked to where their SOC lead was telling us he calculated out their cut and paste time on initial incidents was 35 to 40 hours a week, and that's a lot of time just on information gathering that really should be automated and can be automated in pretty much in most of the platforms. This should be the case. That's what you're looking at. I'm going to move forward one more time here just because we're getting really close to the end of it here. We've got about 6.5 minutes left for Q&A. Mike, any other thoughts just before we open it up for the crowd to ask questions?
No, not really. I mean, I think that was a real good overview. I'm always fascinated by, kind of the cost and how folks quantify, kind of what they spend and how much time that they spend on stuff. But I don't know that there's an exact science on that front. But what I can tell you, and I've had similar discussions with lots of, SOC environments there. And there are two aspects to it. One is obviously, kind of the resource savings in terms of, well, that I don't have to do that. But the other thing that I don't want to underappreciate is the agility that you gain by not having to do a lot of that stuff manually, right? So when an analyst can open up a case and have all of the information there, as opposed to spending, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's an hour, what have you, that's 15 minutes that they can actually be digging into the case, digging into the alert, that they're not sitting there just trying to figure out which end is up, right? So when we talk about time to detect, when we talk about dwell time and a lot of those numbers, right, that, tend to underscore efficiency and effectiveness for security teams, automating some of these things can do nothing but really improve the actual performance. So it's about more than just saving money, I think, is a key aspect of that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So at this point, I would like to maybe hand it back to Alex, and we can go into a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah, I've got a question here I displayed earlier that's pretty good. I'll post it again and verbalize it as well. The question is, how does your tool reconcile the need for flexibility with the fact SOAR uses pre-built apps?
Was that one posted in here? Or you posted it?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Let's see. Just posted it in here. Apparently, I'm a little bit on the inept side of it here. Can you repeat that again? Because I actually can't see it coming up in my details area here.
How does your tool reconcile the need for flexibility with the fact SOAR uses pre-built apps? So basically, we use pre-built app. How do you maintain flexibility?
Yeah, so on the flexibility side of it, there's a couple different ways that can be done. And that's going to be dependent on what you have for available resources. So flexibility, we can use pre-built ones that we supply you out of the box, and those ones really should be essentially drag and drop into the environment, as I would say, like an action applet or something else like that. The flexibility comes in as if this came up with Mike things. You want to avoid having to code, but the true flexibility of it is and we have clients who have Python coders at their beck and call, and they're a very technical teams. They want to have the flexibility to write their own applets in the system and have access to our API to be able to tie in those items. So having the ability to do both. In other words, if you supply the applets where you don't need to do any coding, that should be sort of first step, and then having the ability to actually allow teams that if they have the technical resources to have the flexibility to go in and put their own applets in there. That's really how we maintain it within our environment. So we give the ability to do both.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think that even companies that don't have those skills now, once they get comfortable with the tool, they're going to see things that they want to customize. They're going to have a new system that maybe doesn't fit, kind of exactly out of the box. So again, I think a lot of it is, you want as much out of the box as possible because that gets you quickly to value, kind of in an expedient fashion. But the reality is, in order to really get to automating a large portion of kind of your operational motions, you're going to need to have the ability to customize it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question. I was going to grab the one that was this year. So how can SOAR be leveraged to integrate with CMDB for vulnerability management? This is going to be similar to like the threat hunting side of it. You should be able to configure it so you're still using the same vulnerability scanners and reaching out into your environment. So you do need to connect them up in terms of making sure that you've got access to the CMDB as well, and the vulnerability scanner is there as well. But it's no different. It's just looking at it from the other way around. Incident response is something's happened, you're responding to it. Vulnerability management and threat hunting, so to speak, you should be going out and looking for these things and having that come back in there. And there's a lot of tools that you should be able to do both in there. In other words, you shouldn't be limited to just responding to something. You should be able to go out and actively look for items within the environment. So that would be something that I would look at. Can your SOAR platform intake a vulnerability, or have the ability to push out a vulnerability scan, come back with the results, and then give you what you need to act on the vulnerabilities that they find.
Another
There's
question
another
here
one.
is, do you have per action pricing?
No, yeah, we're different that way. We don't have per action pricing. Ours is a different model. It's more modular based and user license, but no, we do not do per action pricing. There's a question: what's the difference between Securosis and D3 Security? Mike,
we're two different companies. To be clear,
two vastly different companies.
Securosis. Listen. I mean, having to spend your time in British Columbia wouldn't be the worst thing, on Earth. But no. So Securosis is an independent research boutique. We're kind of the content guys, so we do a lot of research on these markets and been working with customers on their kind of automation and orchestration initiatives for the past couple of years. Whereas D3, the host of our event today, I won't take the words out of your mouth, mate. You know, you can certainly describe your company as well as anybody.
Yeah, we're a SOAR vendor, so we're the one that supplies a SOAR product, and that's what we're here for. So that's the difference between the two. I want to be cognizant of time here. It looks like we're about 40 seconds over in terms of our time. Alex, any?
No. So we're going to wrap it up right now, and I appreciate everybody's time and all the great questions that we had. There's a few questions that went unanswered, and if you would like to follow up with us directly via email, you see Stan's email is available on the slide deck, which will be shared with you shortly. And then we can also try and reach out to the people whose questions weren't answered. But I feel like we did a good job of addressing most of them, and there were some sort of duplicate questions as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. On behalf of Mike and Securosis and Stan and everybody at D3, we hope you have a great day wherever you are. And if you want to learn more about D3, come check us out on our website, d3security.com. Check out our blog. And as Mike would say, you know, read Securosis stuff. They have great research, in-depth, independent, and they have a very active blog and research as well. Does that sound agreeable, Mike? Anything you want to add at the end?
It does. And I'd also say check your phone every so often to make sure your friggin' call hasn't dropped. But, you know.
It's okay. You owe us a beer at RSA or something like that.
I do. It can be multiple. You're Canadian, so it'll be wheat beer. So I'll have to double up on that one.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We'll end the presentation for today. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.